In this video, I'm going to be counting down the top 10 most violent anime that I've ever seen. I'm going to be limiting this video to just pre-year 2000 anime. I may make a video for post-2000 anime coming up in the future sometime. One of the great things about older anime, especially during the 80s and maybe early 90s, we saw a shift from the TV format to an OVA format, where anime creators were able to have more free reign over the content of the animation without having to worry about TV censorship. This led to this era of anime having some of the most violent animations ever created, as the creators were able to pack the animations with all this crazy, over-the-top violence that never would have been allowed on Japanese television, at least without not being heavily censored first. The levels of violence in these animations was one of the things that drew me to them when I first saw them, as I've never really seen anything quite like it in any medium at that time, since I was pretty young when I saw many of these. Even now, that remains one of the features of these old anime that remains very entertaining, and here for you I'm going to count down 10 of the most extreme and most gory and violent anime that I've ever seen. One of the factors I'm going to go off of is the amount of violence, as far as the content and the amount of blood and the body count. And the other factor is going to be the level of detail in the gore. Even nowadays on TV anime, we see a lot of anime that are pretty violent in terms of the body count and the amount of blood shown. But something that was different about these older anime was the amount of detail that actually went into the gore that made it way more gruesome than anything we see today. First up on the list, I have the Fist of the North Star movie from 1986. This is a movie based off of the famous manga series that took the over-the-top violence seen in the manga and in the TV series and took it to an entirely new level. In this movie, the main character Kenshiro wanders around a post-apocalyptic wasteland after humanity has been mostly destroyed by nuclear war. As he travels around, Kenshiro fights against evil people who prey upon the weak and defenseless, and these fights are some of the most over-the-top martial arts fights ever seen in anime. Kenshiro is a master of a martial art that manipulates the body's pressure points, and by hitting his opponent's pressure points, he can cause extremely over-the-top reactions, killing his opponents in graphic ways, such as causing their head to explode. He'll also eventually come to fight other martial arts masters with equally violent martial arts skills, so throughout the film you'll see a ton of violence with people getting cut apart or limbs getting ripped off or even exploding into a spray of blood and gore. And for the Fist of the North Star movie, they dialed up the violence that was already present in the series to a higher level. And according to legend, the animators studied human anatomy in order to make the gore more realistic. And there's even said to be a now lost theater cut of the film that featured even more scenes of gore that ended up being cut out for further releases of the film. There is a ton of violence in this movie, but the over-the-top nature of it actually makes it pretty fun to watch and not too heavy. Its distinct style and fun fights make this a really entertaining watch. At number 9, I have Mad Bull 34. This is a 1990 OVA series based off of a manga by the same title. This OVA is about a new police officer named Daizaburo who joins the toughest police precinct in New York City, and on his first day he's partnered up with New York City's most notorious police officer named Sleepy John Estes and is known as Mad Bull by the criminals of New York City. This anime shows an extremely over-the-top, absurd portrayal of life in New York City, with constant violent crimes being committed by criminals and the police immediately firing on them without asking any questions, executing criminals without a second thought. The straight-laced Daizaburo is completely shocked when he sees his new partner Sleepy engage in all types of unlawful activities, like gunning down thieves with a shotgun, stealing from prostitutes, and destroying tons of property during his clashes with criminals. But throughout the series, Daizaburo comes to realize that everything Sleepy does, he does for a reason, and ultimately everything he does is in order to protect the innocent people of the city. The violence and action is extremely over the top and hilarious at times. It's a very entertaining anime to watch if you don't take it too seriously. It's an anime that takes the style of like 80s buddy cop action films and packs it with as much insane action and violence as possible. The show can be a bit dumb at times, but if you just want some mindless action and violence, and with some scenes that are so ridiculous that it ends up being hilarious, this is a good anime to watch. At number 8, I'm going to go with Ninja Scroll. This anime is a true classic, directed by Yoshiaki Kawajiri. It's one of the most famous anime of the 90s and is one of the most common gateways into that period of anime. Many people finding their way into this period of anime either through this film or through Akira. The story is about a wandering former ninja named Jubei who rescues a female ninja, and through this ends up getting wrapped up in a confrontation against a group of 8 powerful ninjas called the Devils of Kimon. Jubei has to fight each of these ninjas one by one, and each one has special supernatural powers that they will use against Jubei. Each one has a pretty imaginative design and fighting style, which keeps the action very entertaining to watch. Personally, this is one of the first anime that I had ever seen outside of the typical Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, Naruto type of stuff. The level of violence was on an entirely different level from anything I had seen in anime at that point, and these amazing fight scenes with the incredible animation in this film totally drew me in and made me check out so many other anime that I probably would have never even looked at if I didn't watch this film first. And while I wouldn't rank it as the absolute most violent anime that I've ever seen, it may actually be the best anime on this list, and the one that I would most recommend people go see if you haven't seen it already. At number 7, I have the Devilman OVA from 1987. This OVA is based off of Go Nagai's classic Devilman manga. The story revolves around a high school student named Akira Fudo, who one day runs into an old friend of his named Ryo, who informs him of an incoming war between humans and devils that will likely become the end of humanity. Ryo has Akira participate in a ceremony which fuses him with a powerful devil named Amon, and thus allows Akira to use Amon's powers and become the Devilman, humanity's only hope for surviving against the devils. Akira will then transform into Devilman and fight against all the devils that invade humanity, trying to destroy it. This is an extremely violent OVA with a ton of graphic scenes where the devils will possess people and then kill all the humans around them in gruesome ways. There's also a lot of very violent fights between Akira's Devilman and the devils that he's fighting against. It makes sense that the OVA would be violent since it's based off of Go Nagai's Devilman manga, which was one of the most violent and shocking of its time. This OVA is very successful in bringing across the action and violence from the manga and putting it into an animated form. Probably the standout violent scene to me is the club scene where Ryo is trying to get Akira to transform into Devilman for the first time. In this scene, people become possessed by devils and transform into their devil forms in extremely gruesome transformations. These devils then kill the people around them, and then when Akira transforms into Devilman, he then goes and slaughters all of the devils around him and completely tears them apart in massive sprays of blood and gore. There's also a second episode to this OVA that came out in 1990 called Devilman the Demon Bird, which is also very violent and is pretty much more of the same of what you see in this OVA. At number 6, I have Shoujo Tsubaki, released in 1992. If this was a list of the most disturbing anime of all time, this would probably rank as the number 1 pick, or at least very close to it. In terms of violence, it's not the most violent anime that I've ever seen, but it does have its share of violent scenes. The story is about a girl named Midori who is orphaned at a young age and with nowhere to go is taken in by a traveling circus. There she suffers horrific abuse at the hands of the members of the circus. These scenes would be disturbing enough from their contents alone, but they're portrayed with extremely twisted, disturbing visuals that give everything an even more bizarre and horrifying feeling to them. The film was based off of a manga drawn by Eroguro manga artist Suehiro Maruo, who is known for creating manga with violent and extreme content. The film was almost entirely created by one man alone, named Hiroshi Harada, who did basically everything in creating this animation all by himself, other than the soundtrack and the voice acting. The shocking content and disturbing visuals of this animation actually led to this animation being banned in Japan for many years and only being available in a heavily censored form. The low-budget animation style also serves to increase the unsettling nature of the animation. This film has a very unique style to it, and despite its very disturbing contents, I actually consider it to be an anime that's pretty much a must-watch at least once just to see what it's like. And it's also very interesting to look into the unique history of this animation. I'm not going to get into that during this countdown video, but I may go into it in a video where I review this anime in the future. At number 5, I have Ninja Resurrection. This is a 2-episode OVA from 1998. Simply put, the plot is about a man named Jubei who fights against against the forces of evil who are plotting to overthrow the current Tokugawa shogunate by resurrecting legendary warriors from the past and bringing them back as demonic warriors that will fight for their cause. This OVA seems to have a pretty bad reputation among anime fans, at least from what I've seen, as it seems to be considered a knockoff version of Ninja Scroll. And I could definitely see the similarities to Ninja Scroll with a similar setting, a major focus on action and violence, and even having the main characters both be named Jubei. And if comparing the two, it definitely doesn't live up to the quality of Ninja Scroll, but it still manages to be pretty entertaining by having an absolutely ridiculous plot and taking the violence up to an entirely new level. The fights in this animation are extremely violent with very high body counts, even having multiple scenes where innocent civilians and even children are killed in brutal fashion. There's scenes showing the aftermath of a large battle with mountains of corpses and heads on pikes, and contains a scene where I believe may be the scene that has the most people killed in it in a single scene, of any anime that I know of at least, where the resurrected warriors cut down a huge number of people who are at a street festival. They slash through the crowd and cut everyone in the crowd clean in half, then chase down and slash apart every remaining person. And there's really a ton of other scenes of violence and gore, and other bizarre, disturbing scenes. As a whole, the OVA is really not that great, but it is somewhat entertaining just because of the extremity of its violence. Unfortunately, it ends on a cliffhanger and we never even get to see the final fight between Jubei and the resurrected warriors, which to me is really this OVA's biggest weak point, is that it really needed more episodes to flesh things out and try to tell a complete story, because what we're giving here is almost 2 episodes of just mindless violence with no resolution at all. At number 4, I have Apocalypse Zero from 1996. This is another controversial animation that isn't thought of very highly by most anime fans, but remains remembered all this time later due to its extreme level of violence. The story takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting that's somewhat similar to the setting of Fist of the North Star, where it's a setting where humanity's been destroyed, but there's still things like buildings and stuff that serve as remnants of the past. The main character is a high school student named Kakugo, who was trained since childhood by his father in martial arts, as well as given a set of powerful armor that give him the ability to fight against the horrible monsters that inhabit this world. The pockets of normal humans surviving in this world struggle to survive due to attacks from horrible monsters that prey upon them. These monsters seem to be horrifically mutated humans who have become grotesque monsters that now prey upon humans. These monsters have pretty grotesque designs that have a bizarre sexual aspect to them as well, that just adds to the disturbing aspect to the violence that they commit. And this OVA mostly takes place with Kakugo fighting against these monsters and protecting his schoolmates, as well as fighting against his brother who also possesses a similar type of armor that he does and has the goal of wiping out humanity. Other than very brief scenes establishing some sort of plot, this OVA is almost entirely taken up with scenes of violence, usually with scenes of these monsters killing innocent people in horribly graphic ways, filling the screen with sprays of blood, leading to a scene where Kakugo and the monster fight in a very bloody battle. The violence in this animation is extremely over the top, more so than probably any other anime that I've ever seen. And while this is considered by some to be the most violent anime of all time, I actually think the over-the-top nature of it tones it down a little bit because it adds more levity and ridiculousness to the OVA's violence, since the violence feels less realistic. If there's an anime that I know of that gets a lot of hate from old anime fans, this is probably it, because admittedly, outside of a very basic story, it's just non-stop ridiculous violence that's completely over the top. But personally, I think that there's still some entertainment to be found here, and is worth watching if you just want to turn your mind off and watch something extremely crazy, because this is probably one of the most, if not the most, crazy old anime that I can think of. And now we're reaching the top 3, and of these 3, I think these are the 3 most violent anime of all time, and I had a hard time picking which one is the most violent, but eventually I came to settle on this order. So at number 3, I have Angel Cop, released in 1989. This anime takes place in a not too distant future and centers around a special police force that was created to combat terrorist attacks. Every member of this police force is extremely skilled, and they are given free rein by the government to kill anyone in the line of their work that they see necessary. In the early episodes, this police force is trying to stop a terrorist plot to attack the Tokyo Stock Exchange, to create chaos in the nation and ruin the nation's economy. While fighting against these terrorists, a group of terrorist hunters joins the fight. These hunters consist of 3 members with extremely powerful psychic abilities. which they use to hunt down and brutally kill every terrorist that they can find. Our main characters in the special police force come into conflict with these hunters when trying to capture and keep a terrorist alive in order to question him and uncover the larger conspiracy behind him, as well as coming into conflict with the Japanese government once they uncover too much information and find out about a conspiracy involving the government. Every one of this anime's 6 episodes is completely filled with scenes of violence. The most extreme scenes in the animation are the people being killed by the psychic powers of the hunters. One uses his powers to either crush or tear apart terrorists, leaving a trail of mutilated corpses in his path. Another is a little girl who uses her powers to burn people alive. Another scene that stands out in its violence is a torture scene where they're trying to get information out of the terrorist leader, while among other things mutilating his arm in a way that really stood out to me in its brutality. Every episode is filled with scenes of the police force fighting against terrorists or other soldier groups, which results in a very high body count of people being gunned down. And the thing that makes these scenes in this anime stand out more is the level of realism that many of these scenes have. Of course, not the scenes that feature the psychic powers or futuristic weaponry. Just the scenes of people being shot in this animation seem far more graphic than they are in many other animations with similar types of deaths. Every bullet is shown piercing through its target with extreme detail, and many of the scenes are shown with extreme detail put into the realism of the gore that is being portrayed. The most famous violent scene of this anime that I've seen posted all around the internet is a scene from the first episode where our main character shoots a female terrorist multiple times, with the last bullet hitting her in the head, causing her brain to fly out all over the wall. The level of detail and realism to the gore was something that I had never seen in an anime before and has only been matched in very few anime. Moving on to number 2, I have the Violence Jack OVAs. And if I have to pick one for this list, the standout OVA to me in terms of violence would be the second OVA, Evil Town. This is an OVA that I have done a review on this channel already, where I called it the most violent anime of the 80s. This OVA is based off of a manga by Devilman creator Go Nagai. Devilman was already very violent, but Violence Jack took that level of violence to an entirely new level. Violence Jack takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting, where he roams around the wasteland, fighting against evil and protecting the innocent that can't defend themselves, and kills his enemies with a gigantic knife that he carries. The Evil Town OVA takes place in a shopping mall that had been buried underground during an earthquake, and Violence Jack shows up to protect a group of supermodels from a group of crazed biker rapists and a group of businessmen rapists. The most violent scenes, though, are the scenes of the biker gang committing violent acts against the innocent people living within the shopping mall. This includes a scene where one of them murders a group of innocent children for fun, and a ton of scenes of very graphic violence and rape committed against the women in this OVA. These scenes rank as some of the most violent that I've seen in any anime, and this OVA really doesn't pull any punches in its depictions of violence and gore, including both horrific violence like the violence committed against the women, and pretty ridiculous violence such as a scene where the leader of the biker gang eats the corpse of another member of the biker gang in order to transform into a gigantic monster to fight Violence Jack. If you can get past the extreme levels of violence, or better yet, if that's what you're looking for, this animation does manage to be pretty entertaining, and I do enjoy its animation style and its atmosphere. And before I get to the number 1 pick and reveal what is, in my opinion, the most violent anime of all time, I'll give a few honorable mentions of anime that are extremely violent and are very close to the level of the anime discussed in this list. I had to cut down the list just to 10 entries, but these were all right there and in consideration for making the list. These are going to be Blood Rain, Curse of the Yoma, Demon City Shinjuku, Wicked City, MD Geist, A Kite, Battle Royale High School, and Urotsuki Doji. And the number 1 most violent anime of all time, in my opinion, is going to be Genocyber. Genocyber is a 5-episode OVA released in 1994, and it easily takes the crown for the most violent anime for me, and I expect that anyone who's seen it would likely agree. It seems like every minute of this OVA is just packed with some of the most extreme violence that I've ever seen put into animated form, with gore, blood, and guts being shown on a scale that I have never seen in any anime before or since. The animation is about a weapon called Genocyber that is created by a major corporation. The Genocyber is a humanoid machine that at its core is controlled by 2 twin psychic sisters. One of the sisters, named Elaine, escapes, and when the Genocyber awakens, she causes a wave of chaos and destruction. Then the Kuryu group that created Genocyber try to recapture it by using similar weapons that they've created. It seems like throughout this OVA, the creators did their best to put in as many scenes of violence as possible. Apart from the typical blood and guts that are seen throughout, this OVA also has what stand out to me as two of the most violent scenes that I've ever seen. One is a scene where a group of children are gunned down with extreme detail showing each bullet hitting them, resulting in a spray of brains and guts. Another is a scene where a hospital is attacked and everyone inside is killed. Most of the people are cut apart, showing the hallways littered with organs in a pool of blood. A nurse is shown with her throat cut and her head starts to fall back, causing the wound to tear and her head falling clean off, and a doctor is vivisected, getting cut open and being left alive with all of his organs exposed. The level of detail spent on the anatomy of the brains and guts is also pretty extreme and pretty impressive. Probably the only anime that I've seen that's that detailed in terms of anatomy and its gore was probably Angel Cop, but Genocyber depicts that level of detail in its gore even more often than Angel Cop did, and the brutality and cruelty of its violence was probably only matched by Violence Jack Evil Town, but the level of detail in the gore was far more extreme in Genocyber. That's why Genocyber to me is the most violent anime of all time. It put it together with an extreme amount of violence that was cruel and senseless, and violence and gore that was depicted with an extreme amount of detail put into it. That's why Genocyber to me is the most violent anime of all time. And that's going to do it for this list. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. And thank you so much for watching.